until literally just a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, the vast majority of talent acquisition professionals that even claimed to use data were using data to justify decisions instead of using data to drive decisions.
Hi everybody, this is Josh Becerra from Agrarian. Welcome to the next episode of How I Work. I'm here with Steven Rothberg, the Chief Visionary Officer and founder of collegerecruiter.com. Thanks for being here, Steven.
I am really looking forward to this conversation, Josh. Thanks.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So for listeners, just so you get a little sense for what collegerecruiter.com is, it serves primarily Fortune 1000 companies, government agencies, and other employers who hire at scale, helping over 12 million candidates find great new early career opportunities every year. That's a lot of people. Congratulations, Steven.
Thank you. What's the expression? You can fool some of the people some of the time, or something like that. Yeah.
Well,
no, it's when we think about those numbers and kind of what that translates into, it's really awesome. There's no higher honor than being able to help somebody find a great career.
Yeah. No, I think it really is awesome, and you're not fooling anybody. You're obviously doing a great job, and I'm sure that the companies you work with are really happy with the work. So, but you weren't always like in recruiting.
No.
So I think you have just a crazy, unique story, leaving like law to pursue these entrepreneurial passion. So, can you tell listeners a little bit about what made you decide to like shift gears? What's happened in the years since making that?
Yeah.
And then kind of where you are today?
Yeah, sure. No sweat. So first of all, I think I've never run across anybody who's my age or older. I'm 56, who can truthfully say that their entire career was a well mapped out plan and that they had this grand vision and followed it. I think life is a series of mostly happy accidents, hopefully mostly happy. So on my dad's side, his dad, my dad, then me, we all have the entrepreneurial bug, DNA, virus, call it what you may. So when I was growing up, it was very normal to me to be in a family where somebody had a small business, and the cliche about that people who have their own business would rather work 80 hours for themselves than 40 hours for someone else. That definitely runs very deep in my family. And when I was growing up, I lived in Winnipeg, Canada, right smack dab in the middle, about 500 miles northwest of where you and I live now in Minneapolis. Well, we live separately, but we live in the same metro. Yeah. And I went to undergraduate school in Winnipeg in the University of Manitoba, which is by far the best undergraduate school in the province of Manitoba. And that's, that's my
alma mater.
Yeah, claim to fame, right? In my last year there, in what Americans would call their senior year, Canadians would call their fourth year, I was in a small business marketing class with a friend of mine, and he had a little micro business on campus. He was doing things like publishing calendars, giving them away free to the students, and his customers were advertisers. They were restaurants, retailers, apartment companies, etc. I learned about his business. I came to him with an idea to do a campus map of the school. He thought it was a bad idea. I thought it was a good idea. He said, hey, if you want to do it, go for it. So I did this campus map, same business model, restaurants, retailers, apartment companies advertised on it. I made way more money than my friends did that summer, and also worked way more, but enjoyed it way more. And then I did what I had been planning to do since I was 13, which was to move away from Winnipeg. It's way too cold. And I came to law school here in Minneapolis, went to the University of Minnesota.
Where it's much
graduated. Yeah. And I think in a previous conversation, I shared with you one of my favorite jokes about myself, that I'm probably the only person who lives in Minnesota and moved here for the weather. The and those of your listeners who have been here in January will understand right now that they are listening to a crazy person. But okay, so I graduated from law school, was working for a first year as a lawyer, working for the court system in Minnesota, and I kind of got back into the business. I started it part time, and the new second version of the business, I published a map for the University of Minnesota, another one for St. Cloud State University, which is a state school about an hour and a half from the Twin Cities, and some stuff like that. And then after a few years, mid-90s, this thing called the internet came along. And we added an employment website called collegerecruiter.com. And it's basically, it's a job search site or a job board, somewhat like, say, Indeed, LinkedIn, for the older listeners, Career Builder, Monster, sure, where the candidate goes, types in a couple of keywords, the location for the job they're looking in, they hit submit, they see the job posting ads, click on them and apply. It's basically online help wanted ads, online classified ads. We launched in 1996. We were one of the first 200 job boards worldwide. They're now about 100,000, depending on how you count them. And when we first launched, if we had more than about 200 users hitting our site at the same time, the site would crash. Now we literally have hundreds of thousands a day. On like busier days, we have several million what we call early career jobs, those that require 0 to 3 years of experience. We're global. About a third of our business is overseas. So yeah, it's been a ride, but it's also been 32 years.
Yeah. So in that time, you've told me that you've seen like this massive improvement in your customers' skill sets and abilities to like use data to make their decisions. And my listeners are all marketers and data wonks and geeks. So can you talk a little bit about what it used to look like when you're thinking about like selling to companies, and now like the buyer within some of these Fortune 1000 companies, their changed skill sets and abilities? Like, how is it different today than maybe it was 30 some years ago?
Yeah, it's really different now, even from how it was 5 years ago. So the niche or the industry that we're in, most people would call it TA tech, talent acquisition technology. It in almost every single way lags what I would call consumer marketing. The advertising, the promotion of product, services, even educational opportunities. We've always been, as an industry, 5 to 10 years behind. So the best way that I can put it is that until literally just a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, the vast majority of talent acquisition professionals that even claimed to use data were using data to justify decisions instead of using data to drive decisions. In other words, I'm going to run an ad on that job board, and then they say in between their ears, because I saw the ad on the Super Bowl and I think that monkey was really cute. But what they say to their boss and their coworkers is, because the data shows that the ROI should be really positive.
Yeah.
Ask them 3, 4, 5 years ago what ROI meant. They probably didn't really know. Even if they could say return on investment, they wouldn't be able to articulate how they were actually calculating that. It was just something they heard at a conference. It was something they heard a vendor say. It made them sound and maybe feel smart. Now, I'm definitely not saying that they were all like that, but there were a sizable number that were. By and large, they were people more of my generation, Gen X, and the older generation, boomers. Not that we're dumb, not that we don't know how to do math, but we didn't grow up with data analytics. Yep. We didn't go to school where that was integrated into our course offerings. So when we were taught, either in school or at a job, how to evaluate an advertising opportunity, most of it was, are other companies like yours using it? And if so, it's probably a good place to advertise.
Yeah.
There
Or
wasn't really a
are
good.
other successful companies using it?
Yeah.
It might not be exactly in your industry. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like when I was in high school, the first personal computer, the first successful personal computer came out, IBM 1982. And there was this expression in that era, not so much about the personal computer, but their mainframe computers, that nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. In other words, if you're like an IT professional and you go to your boss and say, we can either buy compact computers or Sperry computers or controlled data or IBM, if you bought IBM, if you recommended IBM, even if it proved not to be the best choice, it was never going to be a bad choice.
Right.
And so you wouldn't lose your job. Advertising was very much like that. If you ran an ad in the Sunday newspaper, it might not be the best use of your money, but it wasn't a bad use of your money. And, when this thing called the internet came along, and now all of a sudden you can track impressions, you can track clicks, you can track applications, which to consumer marketers would be the same as a lead. Now you had the data at your fingertips where you could say, hey, if I run an ad in the Sunday newspaper, I'm going to get somewhere between 40 and 45 applications, and it's going to cost me $1,000. If I run an ad on, in that time era, monster.com, I'm going to spend a couple $100 and I'm going to get a couple hundred applications. Where's your money best spent? It would be on Monster.
Yeah. So now fast forward to today, and everybody knows what ROI is. They know how to calculate it. They have their fingers on the phone.
Your listeners do. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, so the world has definitely changed, and it sounds to me like because of all those changes, you've made some pretty significant changes in your business model, developing products, like responding to those changes in customer needs. So can you talk a little bit about, what you've done with your business recently?
Yeah, I'd love to. So quite literally a year ago at this time, kind of Q1 2022, only a small percentage of our employer customers, those advertising their jobs with us, were able or willing to share conversion data with us. We sent them 1,000 clicks. How many of those converted into applications or leads? And I think only one was doing that in real time. Without even just summary data, like once a day, even once a month, we would have no way of knowing if we sent them 1,000 clicks, how many of those converted into applications. So we had no benchmark. We had no idea if 800 of them were applications or 8 or 0. And we also had no way of measuring or knowing then which of those 1,000 are converting into applications, the kinds of clicks they want more of, and which aren't. And so we couldn't adjust the kinds of traffic that we were sending to them to send them more of the good traffic, less of the bad. Last summer, we reached a tipping point in our business. We brought on some new people, and they had new knowledge, abilities, and that coincided with kind of a turning point in the industry where more of the employers felt comfortable about sharing that data. It was becoming more the norm. They were just now one of many sheep rather than being the one out in front. They were comfortable that this was a good thing. So now, almost all of our customers are sharing conversion data with us. Most of them are in real time. So the beauty of that is that if a company starts advertising with us on Monday, by Tuesday, we're delivering meaningful traffic. And by Wednesday, we're adjusting the traffic that we're sending to them to reduce the bad traffic, increase the good traffic. So the common denominator that most of our customers use to evaluate their media, whether it's College Recruiter or Indeed or LinkedIn or whatever they're using, is what's called the effective cost per application. If they spend $1,000 with us and we deliver 10 applications, they've got an effective cost of per application of $100. The actual effective cost is usually somewhere 25 to 50 for most kinds of jobs. But if it's $100, if the ECPA, the effective cost per application that we're delivering is $100 and Indeed is $120, that's going to lead the customer to reduce how much they're spending with Indeed and increase how much they're spending with College Recruiter. Makes total sense. That's using data to drive your decisions, because Indeed clearly has a more powerful brand than College Recruiter. Now, some might say, well, if Indeed's at 120 and College Recruiter's at 100, why would the customer spend any money with Indeed? And then you get into a conversation of scale. Can they get all the candidates that they want from College Recruiter? No. We're just probably not going to be able to deliver that. So then you need to sort of layer on some less efficient sources, add on in Indeed or whatever. Indeed's actually kind of a bad example because they tend to be one of the lower cost providers, but that's another story for another day.
So, so you developed this like new product, and I know when we were prepping, you used the terms like bubblegum, baling wire, and Band-Aids as a product. So obviously you heard that, you wanted to get to where you could really show what this cost per application metric was. So talk a little bit about that product development philosophy and how it led you to get to where you are.
Yeah. So the product managers who are listening to this, get prepared to be have a lot of cringes and roll your eyes really seriously. So if you're driving, pull over because you won't be able to see the road. So I am for good or bad, one of those people who is not afraid to take chances. I've gotten better at evaluating those and hopefully minimizing the risk and maximizing the upside. I wouldn't say I'm perfect at it, but I'm better than I used to be. Okay. What happened with the product, and it's what we call jobs that scale. It's a pay-per-click job posting product. We had two customers come to us. One was a big insurance company. Another one was a big gig platform in 2016, so 7 years ago now. Both of them came and said, hey, the most expensive job posting package that we can buy from you from College Recruiter is $12,500 a year, because it wasn't pay-per-click, it wasn't pay-per-lead, it was just post and pray. We run an ad for 30 days, it costs you X, or you sign up for an all-you-can-eat or an unlimited posting package for a year, and that's what they had, $12,500 a year. And both of them basically said within a couple of days, independently of each other, if we paid you 4 times as much, could you deliver 4 times as many candidates to us? And as a business owner, when somebody says, I want to give you some more of my money, can you help me do that? The answer is always yes. And then very often you figure out how to do that later. Right. And that's when our employees complain about us and say, what was Steven thinking? What was Josh thinking? That's a lot of times where that comes from. So I clearly said yes. And that's where the bubblegum, baling wire, and Band-Aids came from. So what we did is we took our existing product, a duration-based traditional job posting product, and ran their job postings on our site exactly as we had been. But then what we did is we took those postings and we sent them over to some other job boards, like Glassdoor, for example. Mm-hmm. And we said to Glassdoor, we'll pay you 25 cents a click for every candidate that you show that job to and who clicks through. The customer was paying us 50 cents a click. So when we paid Glassdoor 25 cents a click, we had a 50% profit margin on that kind of locked in. And that allowed us to scale. That job posting could then scale. That's where the name Jobs at Scale came from. So I'd like to say that I entered into it as a well thought out pilot. Let's pretend that I did. Yeah. What it really was, it was a pilot in hindsight, because if it had failed, we wouldn't have moved forward. We wouldn't have spent months and months and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in development. It proved itself out by doing it incredibly manually, incredibly inefficiently. But then we could see that automation now was a worthwhile investment. Yep. And then we invested that money and automated that process. That whole job distribution that we were doing is now called programmatic. We were programmatically distributing job postings through our early automation, but we didn't have the word for it yet. We just called it job distribution. But there was a machine that was basically deciding this job runs best on Glassdoor and this job runs better over here, and this is how much we should pay per click, and this is when we're going to turn the jobs off. It was rudimentary, but it was automated.
I mean, I think it's amazing, and I think, you probably have those moments where you may have regretted saying yes to a customer, but I'm pretty sure that this was not one of those moments where you regret. I know that transformational for your business.
I have definitely said yes when I should have said no doubt.
So you bring up something really interesting around like automation, at the Chat GPT, right? AI is like a big new thing, and but there's all these other thoughts on like the impending recession or possible recession. So I want to just kind of hear what you have to say about like where the employment market is at, where your thoughts are on this like possible recession, future impacts of like Chat GPT on your industry. I'd be curious, like, if you have any tips for employers on hiring with all this kind of chaos going on.
Yeah. Well, when people ask me this job title that you have, Chief Visionary Officer, what does that mean? What do you do? This is what it means. This is what I do. So about half of my time is spent on trying to look at macro conditions, whether it's the economy, whether it's Silicon Valley Bank and what impact that might have, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's Chat GPT, whether it's the dumpster fire that we used to call Twitter. I mean, what is this? How does that impact our company, our employees, our customers, the candidates that use us? So the economy, the job market, this is still a really, really strong job market. Mm-hmm. So normally there are about 2 job seekers for every job opening. Now, even though a lot of people are concerned about the labor market and people are kind of down in the dumps about it, some people are, now we have 2 job openings for every job seeker. It's still inverted. So it's not as strong as it was coming out of the worst of COVID when it was 4 job openings per job seeker. So there's no doubt that it's softening, but it's not soft, with one very notable exception, and that is tech. So a ton of companies invested a ton of money during COVID to automate a lot of what they had been doing manually. And that work was done by tech workers. And so they were in very high demand and they were able to command very high salaries. God bless them, they deserved it. And why shouldn't they have taken the money? It was there, they earned it, go for it. But a software developer that 4 years ago might have been making 80 grand and the last couple years was making 250 grand is now suddenly finding out that they're going to be making 120 grand. If they look back at where they were 4 or 5 years ago, if they go, hey, in 4 or 5 years, rather than making 80, I'm going to make 120, I think they would have been happy. But it's like half of what they were making just a year ago, and they're having trouble finding those jobs. So their pain is real. I mean, with far fewer prospects, far less choice, they might have to go into the office now, where before they could stay at home if they wanted to. And they're making a lot less money than they were over the last couple of years. But almost every single other sector, the world is still your oyster. And so I'm still very bullish on the labor market. For our business, this is actually better than it was a year ago. Because a year ago, when there were 4 jobs for every job seeker, an employer could run an ad and not get a single application. If you don't get anybody applying, you're not going to hire anybody. If you're not going to hire anybody, why spend the money on advertising? Where now they have a good fighting chance to hire somebody. So now they're more willing to spend that money on advertising. So I think in the long run, this is better. The overall economy, are we in a recession? Are we not in a recession? Are we heading to a recession? Boy, I wish I had a crystal ball. I'd like to say that barring something really significant, something that we can't really foresee, this is what's going to happen. I think the reality is we're in this new world where there are constantly big new things that we can't foresee. So we kind of have to expect the unexpected. And that makes me nervous. I was fortunate to spend a few weeks in the UK in the fall. And the doom and gloom there was so different than the sense of optimism here in the US. So I kind of feel like what we're going to have is some sectors are going to be more like the UK, where there's going to be doom and gloom like in the tech sector. Some countries, maybe even some regions of the country, like California with all the natural disasters that are going on right now, I don't know how they are going to have a very good year. There's so much disruption, there's so much destruction. That's going to really hurt that economy. The California economy is like, what is it, like 10%, 15% of the US? So that's going to bring us down. What happens in Ukraine? Things like that. I guess I'm cautiously optimistic. ChatGPT, I use that multiple times a day. I'm a big fan. I find some of the results amusing. I've never run across anything that would like scare me other than just what I've read in the media. It does a pretty darn good job. If I was a lower level copywriter, or somebody like who's, say, English isn't a first language, like a writer in the Philippines who's writing articles on the cheap, I would be looking for a different profession. If I was a software developer who just sort of like was a grunt and banging out line after line after line of code and not really doing anything high end, I would be looking for a different profession because I think those jobs are about to go away. The impact on our industry, on the the job boards and stuff like that, I think that there are going to be, when ChatGPT really becomes real time, using real time data, I think you're going to, and other systems like it, Bing's equivalent, Google's equivalent, when they kind of get their shit together, I think you're going to have job seekers going to Google like they do now, running a search. I'm looking for an HVAC job near me. And that their equivalent of ChatGPT will come back and will say, here are the 3 jobs that seem to match your interests. Would you like me to apply to them for you? And you'll say yes to job 1 and 3, but not to job number 2. I don't like job number 2 because it doesn't pay enough. Can you find a job that pays more than that? And then they'll come back to you with 3 more results, and maybe you'll apply to those 3 also. That's going to really speed up job hunting. And I don't know if employers are ready for that. That's going to be highly disruptive to the job board industry. But if the job boards continue to be a better resource of the job postings and treat candidates better, make it easier to apply than employers do on their own sites, then Google will send those candidates to the job boards. It won't send it to the employers. Google's going to send those candidates to wherever it's best for the candidate. And I think employers are assuming job boards are going to get cut out. I don't think that's necessarily the case. If you've ever applied to a job at a big company, it's excruciating.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that it's the data set that it gets trained on. And my presumption is it's way easier to say, go train yourself on collegerecruiter.com's data versus go to, 50 different Fortune 1000 websites and try to train yourself on their data, right? You have structured data.
Yep.
They can so.
Yeah. And we're uploading our data to Google every day. Most employers never upload their data at all. And so Google has to come out to the employer's site. So yeah, I certainly don't think that it's going to be the death of our industry, but I do think it's going to force some pretty radical innovation. Not such a bad thing.
No, not at all. So you're talking innovation. You got visionary in your title. This is the last question that I always ask all of my guests, and that's who's kind of inspiring or challenging your kind of mental models today? Authors, podcasters, thought leaders. Do you have anybody who you've read recently or heard and said, man, that's really interesting?
Yeah. So the two people that over the last couple of weeks I've had some really great engagement with them, and I just love who they are, what they stand for, how they freely share their thinking, their thoughts. They're just both so giving. So one is the founder of a company called Recruitix. He used to work at Indeed. Recruitix is sort of an advertising agency and also a programmatic job ad company. He's the first person that I know that had the job title Chief Visionary Officer. Okay. And I pretty much shamelessly ripped it off from him. After verifying on LinkedIn that it wasn't just him, by the way. But anyway, so his name is Tim Deneen. And Tim and I were actually joking on LinkedIn the other day about sort of teasing each other about who's been in the industry longer. He teased me and said that I'm the godfather of programmatic. And I teased him and said that he was the big bang of programmatic, that there was nothing before Tim. Right. The other person on a thought leadership basis is a guy named Jim Durbin. Okay. And Jim works for PSG, which is a big RPO, a recruitment process outsourcing company. And his nickname is the Indeed Whisperer. If you ever want to know what's happening at Indeed, why are they doing this? Where are they going? Why is it something work this way? Why doesn't it work that way? You talk to Jim.
Got it. All right. Well, we'll have to look them up on LinkedIn. Hopefully they got tons of fun content. I really appreciate this. This has been fun. I hope people think this is fun content. So, Steven, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this episode of How I Work.
Awesome, Josh. I owe you a beer downstairs outside your office at 612 Brew.
Yep, that sounds good. I'll take you up on that. We'll say goodbye for now.
Cheers, man.